Tee. Welcome to the 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series where your man Louie Tee aims to break down all 32 teams in the National Football League's 2019 NFL Draft using our baseball grading scale. Single, double, triple, home run. There are no strikeouts here in the Draft Wrap-Up Series because we cannot tell how these players are going to pan out. And I don't want to discount any of these young men before they get their chance in the National Football League. And so we'll get a score for each and every single player selected in said team's draft. We'll apply bonuses when necessary, get an aggregate score, divide by the number of picks, which will yield us an overall grade for that team's draft. We'll then move on to the next team in the series picked by you. That's right, you, the viewer out there, are in total control as this is the You Pick format. Simply be the first to leave a comment in the comment section of this and future videos stating two things: the phrase next and the team you'd like to see next. For an example, Browns, next, Cleveland, next, Dogs. You get where I'm going with this. As a matter of fact, the next team up in the series is none other than the Cleveland Browns. And what an offseason it was for the Browns on the heels of what we deem to be a fairly successful season. Again, low standards, low bar has been set for the Browns, but that bar has been upped this offseason. They feel like Baker Mayfield is right where he needs to be. Take this team to the next level after a season in which they went 6-9-1, I believe they were last year, were the Browns, or 7-8-1, I think they were. Either way, this is a team that up until the final couple of weeks of the season were in the playoff hunt. Baker Mayfield was playing outstanding football. They've added so much to this team. They've revamped the way that this organization looks, starting with new head coach Freddie Kitchens, who was the offensive coordinator last year, has been promoted to head coach. He's come in now, and this offense seems to have a little bit of a pep in its step, and it looked that way towards the end of the season when he was able to really put his grasp on this offense once Hugh Jackson was ousted out of Cleveland. You look at this football team as a whole and what they're going to be doing, and you look at the defense, it's going to be a change. No more Greg Williams on that side of the football, and they're going to be a little bit of a different unit. They bring in a couple of players from New York that look to make huge dents in this football team and really huge contributions. On one side of the football, you add Olivier Vernon, an edge rusher, to potentially be the yin to the yang of Myles Garrett. And on the offensive side of the football, obviously, shame on you if you step toot the old dirty Beckham. Odell Beckham Jr. added to the mix with juice, teaming up with his old LSU teammate and best friend, and all of a sudden now the offense looks like it's ready to rock and roll as well. There's a bunch of talent on this football team, and this Browns team, the expectations are as high as we've seen it for the Browns in forever. I can't remember a season in which there was this much expectation and hype surrounding the Cleveland Browns. The Browns right now are the third favorite in the AFC to make it to the Super Bowl. Think about that for a second. They're higher favorites to make it than the Indianapolis Colts. Higher than any other team not named Kansas City or New England in the AFC. Think about that. They're higher than the Chargers. Let that sink in for a second. That this team has leapfrogged some of the better teams in the AFC to be the third odds-on favorite to make the AFC Championship game. Now, again, you know how these things go. You know, it's all on paper. It takes time for teams to mesh and gel together. You got a first-year head coach in Freddie Kitchens. This thing could go sideways very easily. However, this team looks to be in a position to be highly competitive in 2019. And we thought this is all just off of the strength of free agency and building off the momentum of 2018. We haven't even tapped into the draft yet. Wait until we see what a guy that I think has done a masterful job wherever he's been at GM of picking players, not necessarily running the organization. We saw why he was ousted in Kansas City because he wasn't the most meticulous and wasn't the most organized in Kansas City, but you saw how much talent he was able to acquire in Kansas City for the Chiefs before he left. And so John Dorsey coming over to Cleveland, he's done the same thing here, acquiring talented football players. This wasn't one of my favorite John Dorsey drafts, however. And what I thought the Browns needed to do, because of all the work you had done in the offseason and how many roster spots, you really, let's be real with ourselves. The Browns don't have a ton of roster spots available. With all the draft picks, with all the young players you have under contract, with all the guys that you've acquired via free agency or trades, and all the guys that you've brought into this football team, there isn't a bunch of spots available for incoming football players. And so I thought the Browns needed to be more aggressive in the draft. This should have been maybe a 5 or a 6-player draft. It was 7, so it's not like they went out and got 9 or 10 players. And I thought this was one of those drafts where you go in and maybe it was only 4 or 5 players, but you identify a couple of positions of need. You identify some players that fit those needs that you really love, and you package together some picks and you move up and you grab a couple of those guys and you get out of here, and it's a 5-player draft, but you feel really good about the 5 players you drafted. I thought that they reached severely with their second pick in this draft. We'll talk about that when we get there. I thought that there were some other moves that could have been made. I thought there were other positions that needed to be addressed that they just simply didn't in this draft. Look, all in all, it's going to be a solid draft when it's all said and done. I just thought that they could have went about it a totally different way and maybe had even better results than what they ultimately ended up getting. But nonetheless, we'll see how it turns out. We can sit here and talk about what they did or didn't do. We don't know what this draft is going to be sitting here on May the 22nd, 2019. This could be his best draft. Well, we'll see. No first round pick, obviously, due to the trade for Odell Beckham Jr. So you didn't start your draft to the second round, which is rare for the Browns. They're generally drafting multiple times in the first round, and most of those times, their first pick coming within the top 5 picks. So to go from consistently having a top 5 pick in the first round and multiple picks in the first round to no pick in the first round at all had to be a huge change for Browns fans. But what you ended up getting in the second round felt like a first round pick. Let's start this breakdown of the Browns draft in the second round. 46th overall selection, cornerback out of LSU, Andrez Greedy Williams is the selection to get this Browns draft started. So Andrez Greedy Williams, second round pick. Who would have thought? And this was my number 1 rated corner going into the draft, so I was definitely surprised. Obviously, you know that he wasn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, and that wasn't shocking to me that he wasn't on the radar of some teams in the first round, but to completely fall out of the first round and then not go into the midpoint of the second round was a stunner for me. I'm not going to lie to you, and talked about that on the podcast, Louie Tee Network podcast. Go ahead and check that out if you haven't already done so. What are you waiting on? It's available on Stitcher, Google Music Play, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, and of course the website, LouieTeeNetwork.net. It's on all those platforms. Check it out, Louie Tee Network podcast. I talked about how I was shocked that this guy fell out of the first round. I didn't see this coming. I didn't expect him to last as long as he did. And the Browns, to me, got a gift in the second round. There's some things here that he doesn't have or he didn't do that may rub some people the wrong way. And I'll get to all of that here in a second. But the Browns saw an opportunity. They traded up 3 spots with the Indianapolis Colts, surrendered a 5th round pick in doing so, traded up 3 spots, and got the guy that they coveted sitting here in the second round they had no business getting. So they've got to feel good about this pick here because you feel good about what you've already done. And I was so wrong about the cornerback out of Ohio State last year in the first round. I thought that they made a monumental mistake pulling the trigger on a top 5 pick on a cornerback that I didn't think was worthy of that selection. He proved me wrong immediately last year. And so now you're looking to tag team him with a guy opposite him. And you may have found your man in Greedy Williams. An angular cornerback with tremendous fluidity and ball skills and the desired length and speed to match. Does a great job of contesting balls in flight and is best when in press man-to-man despite generally not actually jamming at the line of scrimmage. So he's a guy that loves to come up to the line of scrimmage. And a lot of times he won't even put his hands on the receiver. He just wants to be close to them so that he didn't give up anything easy and cheap underneath. And so there are times where he will put his hands on and receivers, and there are times when he doesn't let go and he'll pick up penalties. And if you've watched enough Greedy Williams, you'll know that he will pick up penalties, and that's something he's going to do at the next level as well because sometimes he gets a little handsy down the field. If you watched him against DK Metcalf, he picked up a couple of penalties in that game. I watched him against Georgia. He picked up a penalty in that game against Ridley. And so he's a guy that's going to put his hands on the receiver down the field at times. But he's a guy that generally doesn't like to do it at the line of scrimmage, which is actually ironic. He doesn't do it at the line of scrimmage when you should do it. He does it sometimes down the field when you shouldn't do it. But nonetheless, his lack of accountability and run support can be off-putting, and his thin frame coupled with his penchant for being a little handsy down the field doesn't help. But if you're talking pure cover guy, man to man, Greedy Williams is the best this draft has to offer, in my humble opinion. So I look at Greedy Williams, and I feel like the Browns got away with a steal here. Again, if you're talking pure man-to-man coverage, this is the man for the job in the 2019 NFL Draft. Now, if you're talking about a guy playing often soft, cover 3, cover 4, this is not your man. He will give up some easy things underneath. He will give up some completions underneath when he's off coverage. But when you're talking about man-to-man, getting in the face and deleting the airspace and getting all up in the jersey of a player and following them and staying in step with them and being in phase. And I love the fact that when it's time to go and make a play on the ball, he's not tugging on the jersey. The offhand isn't on the shoulder and turning guys. He's looking to knock the football away without impeding the wide receiver. And so there's a lot of things that like. The guy's a 4.37 40 guy, so you know he can run and can carry the long distance speed necessary to keep up with these fast athletes at the wide receiver position. He's 6'2", so he has the length that you're looking for at the cornerback position. There's a lot of boxes he checks. Obviously, the 185 in terms of weight, not what you're looking for, not ideal. Can he put on a few pounds and bulk up a little bit? Sure, but his frame isn't one that suggests he's going to end up at 195 and gain 10 pounds of muscle. He's a slender, thin-framed guy, and I think that's what his body type is, and that's what he's going to remain. And so he may gain 3 or 5 pounds. He's not gaining 10 or 12 pounds. I just don't see that happening. And so bottom line is he is what he is, body type-wise, but he's got length, he's got size, he's got speed. He's got a lot of things you look for. He's not a guy that really wants to help in run support, but he'll tackle wide receivers. He's not afraid to tackle wide receivers. He just doesn't want any smoke with the running backs. So we'll see what happens and if this turns out to be the steal that I think it is for the Browns. But anyway, in the second round, 46th overall selection, LSU cornerback Greedy Williams, to me, is a steal. And let's take cornerback off of the needs board, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But to me, this is...
Hits one high! Hits it deep! It is out of here!
So my comp for Greedy Williams to me is Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. I mean, similar size, similar skill set, similar length, similar speed. Everything that you see in Greedy Williams, we've seen before in Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. So I think this was a pretty easy comp to make. Similar body type, similar skills. A lot of the things that you see in Greedy Williams, we've seen before, like I said, in Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. So this next pick is probably the pick that I have the most issue with. And it's not necessarily the player, it's when the player was selected. And I talked about this during the draft party because my man Sean Mack, a huge Browns fan, was on the live stream with me when we were watching the draft live, and he said, I hate this pick. And he was not in love with the selection of let's talk about it. Third round, 80th overall selection, linebacker out of BYU, Sione Takitaki is the selection. All right, so let's talk about this pick. But before we do, I want to talk about the needs for the Browns. And so every draft that I break down, I give you the needs that I perceive to be needs for the team going into the draft. So you look at the Browns, I thought cornerback was the biggest need that they had. They needed someone opposite their stud from a season ago out of Ohio State. And so thought that was something that they needed to do. And that was my number one need for them. The offensive line, you can't possibly, as a Browns fan out there, you can't possibly be comfortable with your tackle situation. Hubbard at right tackle and the former first-round pick by the Rams at the other tackle position, at left tackle, you can't possibly be satisfied with that. And comfortable probably is the more apt word. You can't be comfortable. Those guys have to make you uneasy. Chris Hubbard on one side and Greg Robinson on the other. That has to make you somewhat uneasy. So I just thought competition wouldn't hurt. You did draft the Harrison kid last year out of West Georgia. That didn't work out as well as you were hoping. And so more competition, more beef at the tackle position, I thought would be what's for dinner in this draft. And I thought that was the second biggest need. You look at safety, obviously you trade away Jabril Peppers. So I thought safety went straight to the top of the list. But then you addressed that in free agency. Burnett was released by the Pittsburgh Steelers, and so you signed him. And so that gives you some veteran presence. Still, to me, you need a young guy at the safety position. And so I was looking forward to seeing you address safety relatively early in this draft as well. Defensive line. I thought that Larry Ogunjobi had a big year last year, and I told you I thought he was really talented. And so you feel good about Larry Ogunjobi, but then you go out and you address it, getting Sheldon Richardson in free agency to add to the mix. That's great. Who else do you have at defensive tackle after that? I just didn't see much depth there. And maybe you have some guys that you like, and I'm overlooking a couple of guys that have developed in your system and you feel good about. I just didn't see anybody that really jumped off the screen at me, doesn't jump off the page. And so I thought this is the position you need to attack via the draft. You didn't in this draft. Running back was the next biggest need for me. I look at your running back position. Love Chubb. Think he's going to be a stud for you moving forward. He was outstanding last year. I think he's going to be outstanding moving forward. Obviously, Kareem Hunt is added to the mix. He's going to be suspended to start out the season. But then after Kareem Hunt, you look at Duke Johnson. I think this is his last year in Cleveland. And we heard the rumors of trade in the offseason. And at one point, I thought he was going to be traded. The Browns said, nope, we're not trading Duke Johnson. He's the only guy with speed at the running back position we have. So I thought, why not go ahead and invest in a running back position? Duke's going to be gone next year anyway. Why not invest in a running back position now with a guy with some speed? And Duke, for all that Duke Johnson does, he's not a speedster either. So you technically don't have the one guy that scares the bejesus out of anybody at the running back position. Chubb might be your fastest back when it's all said and done. And we saw a little bit of that speed in a game last year when he had a big 80-yard run for a touchdown. He might be your fastest back. Why not go out and get a guy that can be a change of pace, dynamic home run threat type of back in this draft? There were opportunities for you to pull the trigger. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. You did not do that in this draft. And then finally, linebacker was something that I thought you needed to address. You ultimately did address that, but way earlier than I thought you were going to, and with a player that shocked probably most people watching the draft and following the draft, and probably a lot of Browns fans out there as well. So I thought that linebacker was a position you needed to take a look at, and you did. You drafted two of them, as a matter of fact, in this draft, and you probably would have been good with just drafting one, to be honest with you. I like Joe Schobert, maybe more so than most people. I happen to be a huge supporter of Joe Schobert. Obviously, Christian Kirksey is one of the unquestioned leaders of your football team. I thought you had a little bit of depth there. Jannard Avery is a guy that, when he's not rushing the quarterback, could also play the linebacker position. So I just thought you had enough stuff there that you didn't need to rush in this draft to select a linebacker unless he was the best player available on your board, which we'll talk about right now, as a matter of fact. Back to my initial story, though. As you see, cornerback has been taken off the board. Let's go ahead and take linebacker off the board now with this selection of Sione Takitaki. So my man Sean Mack was visibly upset about this pick. He was frustrated, did not like the selection of Sione Takitaki. And I told him, look, he's a quality football player, really athletic, more athletic than people give him credit for. He's a big ball of energy, all of those things you like at the linebacker position. But remember, this was an extremely weak linebacker draft class after the two Devons. And so once you got past the two Devons, there was no haste. There didn't need to be any haste in selecting a linebacker unless you loved this guy. Apparently, and I listened to the Browns area scout talk about Sione Takitaki. He sounded like he loved this guy. Again, I don't have a problem with the player. I have a problem with the time, place, and when this guy was selected. All right. The third round, too rich for my blood here. And again, this wasn't a big position of need. And I'll take it a step further. There's no way you're telling me you had him rated higher on your board than Mack Wilson out of Alabama. There's no way. I'm not willing to believe that. I'm not. But obviously, they did. Let's get to his breakdown quickly. Troubled linebacker turned team captain, Sione Takitaki is a big ball of energy on the football field. Plays the game with an aggressive and energy-filled nature that is infectious. Is very physical and a better athlete than given credit for. His aggression can turn from positive to negative as he can overrun plays, get juked easily from being OC, or take poor angles in terms of pursuit angles. He is limited in space as a zone drop defender, limited as a pass rusher, and is often too preoccupied with being a tough guy at the point of attack. What do I mean by that? Yeah, you want your guys to be tough at the point of attack, but you also, your goal on a play isn't to get blocked. Your goal is to go make a play. Now, again, sometimes your job is to take on a blocker. That's your job. Take on that blocker, eat up that gap, and force him elsewhere, all right? That's sometimes your goal is to just take on a blocker. But then there are other times where play can be made. Don't go seeking contact and trying to show a guy, I'm tougher than you, I'm a badass, I'm going to blow you up. Go make a play. And sometimes I think he's preoccupied with like, oh, I'm going to show you. I'm going to take on this block. I may be 230 pounds, but I'm not afraid to take on this blocker. No, go get the running back. Go get the ball carrier. So there's that too. While there is upside because of a positional change, this was a guy that was more of an edge rusher throughout his career, and in his final year at BYU made the switch, the full-time switch to inside linebacker. So there was a bit of a change for him in 2018, and so you got to cut him a little bit of slack there. This was a major reach in the third round, though. That's my assessment of him. 6'1", 238. He really played at 230 last year. All right, he cut down weight. He was in phenomenal shape at 230. So the 238, a little misleading. He probably put some more weight back on for the combine. I don't know if he's as athletic at 238 as he was at 230. I can tell you this much. He looked much more spry in 2018 than he did in 2017. So I'm assuming those 8 pounds make a huge bit of difference. But he still ran 4.63. So if he can carry those extra additional 8 pounds and still run a 4.63, I'm fine with it. 37-inch vert, 10.4 broad. So the athleticism is there. Look, it's again, I don't hate the player. All right, I don't like this. Actually, and you know my saying. Get your guy when you feel the need to get your guy. But in a draft class where the linebacker position, you could have put that on pause. You could have put that on hold and came back around and addressed that in the 5th, 6th round, because there wasn't much difference after the 2 Devins. There wasn't much difference from a guy being selected in the 2nd or 3rd round and being selected in the 5th or 6th round. That's how bad it was at linebacker, whereas you needed safety help. You could have addressed safety much earlier in the draft in the 3rd round, even though I love the guy you got in the 4th round. I wouldn't have been mad if you would have taken him in the 3rd round and then addressed a different position like running back in the 4th round. Or some other position. Offensive tackle could have been addressed here in the 3rd round, which I thought you really needed to address earlier than you did in this draft. There were so many other directions. You could have went and got you a quality defensive alignment here, which I thought you needed to do because the depth at D-line is very slim inside at the interior positions of your defensive line. You could have addressed that here. You didn't even bother with that position in the draft, which means you may like your defensive line position or you didn't like some of the prospects available. Whatever the case may be, I just thought it was way too early for Sione Takitaki. That being said, he's a quality football player. I'm probably being a little harsh here, but I got to send a message that it's not okay to overreach. Like, it's one thing to reach. And again, who are we to say that you're reaching for a player? But then there's one thing to overreach. When I get frustrated with teams in the draft when they take a player that wasn't going to be selected for 3 rounds. Like, when you overreach, okay, if you reach on a guy, maybe you selected him a round too early. That's fine. You had to get your guy because you felt like, I don't know, someone might pull the trigger. But when you overreach, we're talking a full 2-3 rounds. I got a problem with that. This is an overreach here. No one was taking Sione Takitaki off the board. And maybe Detroit scared you half to death by taking Tavai in the second round out of Hawaii. Maybe you thought, oh, shit, they took him in the second round. We probably need to go get ours before somebody snatches him up. I don't think he was going anywhere, to be honest with you. I honestly believe he'd have been sitting there for you in the 5th or 6th round. But you decided to pull the trigger in the 3rd, and you got to pay for that. In the 3rd round, 80th overall selection. Oh, and his comp for me, D'Amico Ryans, which that's actually a quality comp. Now, again, he's got to grow into D'Amico Ryans. He's not coming in as D'Amico Ryans. When I give projections and comps, I'm talking about best case scenario. If this guy is what we think and project him to be, then that's who he comps to. He's not D'Amico Ryans coming in day one, but he could be D'Amico Ryans with his athleticism and his size as a slightly undersized backer. He could be D'Amico Ryans, who had a quality NFL career. He could be that guy. He could not. We'll see. But in the 3rd round, 80th overall selection, linebacker out of BYU, Sione Takitaki for me is all right, so we move on to the 4th round, 119th overall selection. Defensive back out of Miami, Sheldrick Redwine is the selection. Sheldrick Redwine may be my favorite selection in this entire draft. Obviously, Greedy Williams, getting him in the 2nd round was a bit of a steal, but if you're just talking straight up, just you took a guy probably where he was supposed to go, and you're getting tremendous value in doing so. Sheldrick Redwine, for me, he's just a really good football player. I really like him a lot, and so 6 feet, 196 pounds. 4.44, that the old Moses Malone 4.44 40, 39-inch vert, 10.8 broad. So again, dude dripping and oozing with athleticism. A nickel with safety tendencies. Let me explain what that means. Okay, I'd much rather have a nickel with safety tendencies than a safety with nickel tendencies. Here's the difference. If you're a nickel with safety tendencies, that means you're not afraid to tackle. You're a nickel that will get physical. Let's get physical. You'll get down and dirty in the mud when it comes time to put helmet in chest plate and get a guy down. Or in the case of Sheldrick Redwine, he's a shoestring mangler, man. This dude is a cuff shooter. I don't give a damn. I've said this a million times. I don't give a damn how you get a guy on the ground. Just get his ass on the ground. All right? He's not blowing up anybody. What he is doing, though, is he's getting dudes on the ground. What he is probably one of the most sound tacklers in this draft. I'll take him every single day of the week, twice on Sundays. So from that perspective, I know what I'm getting in terms of tackling from Sheldrick Redwine, which, again, he's a nickel with safety tendencies. When you're a safety with nickel tendencies, that means you're a safety that probably should be playing corner because you don't want to tackle anybody and I don't trust you back there. All right, so there's a big difference. When you've got a safety mentality as a nickel, that means you're not afraid. You'll hit anybody, you'll go up in run support, you throw your body around, and you're still playing some quality bang-up cornerback as well. When you're a safety with nickel tendencies, yeah, you can drop down over the slot, but don't ask you to tackle anybody because that's not your forte. So I'd much rather have a safety that's, a safety that can play nickel, but I want you to be a nickel with safety tendencies. And that's essentially what Sheldrick Redwine is. He's a safety, but he looks like a corner. He played corner before at the U, a couple of years of corner before making the switch to safety. And you can tell, looks very fluid and comfortable when he drops over the slot in the nickel. A nickel with safety tendencies, Redwine is what today's NFL free safety looks like. Athletic enough to drop over the slot and run with wide receivers and tight ends. Fast enough to play single high safety and range all over the field. And physical enough to make every tackle and sure enough to be the last line of defense. By no means is Redwine a thumper and his size doesn't exactly scream safety, but he has all the tools necessary to be a major NFL contributor. So, like I said, I saw a guy on tape that at times I thought he was a little lackadaisical in coverage when he was off and often soft. Giving about 7 yards of cushion. Guy runs a slant underneath, and instead of him driving on it and making a play, I thought there were times where he gave up some underneath completions, and you're like, dude, come on, you're better than that. But that aside, he is a guy that I feel comfortable in coverage, one-on-one with his tight end or with a wide receiver. He's a guy that I feel comfortable coming up around the box and being an eighth defender and being a sound tackler. He takes fundamentally sound angles. I didn't see him take one poor angle at all in his pursuits of the ball carrier. This is a guy that I didn't see miss but one tackle. There was one game he had 14 tackles, and like 10 of them were solo tackles. Like, this dude is a machine when it comes to making tackles. I saw an impressive pick that he had in a game. He baited a quarterback, and I believe it was against Virginia, where he's basically playing the middle of the football field. The quarterback never sees him on an over route. He reads the eye of the quarterback. It takes him straight to the football, and he makes an impressive leaping interception, which shows off that 39-inch vertical leap that he has. You saw it on that play where he goes up and essentially plucks the football out of the air. So you get to see a lot of the skill set on display with Sheldrick Redwine, and I was thoroughly impressed with him, so much so that in the fourth round, 119th pick overall, defensive back out of Miami, Sheldrick Redwine, for me, is so my comp for Sheldrick Redwine is Micah Hyde, the defensive back that was drafted by the Green Bay Packers, spent about 3 or 4 years there, moved on to Buffalo, and has been quality in this league really from day one. I've always been a Micah Hyde fan, and I continue to be one as he's moved on to Buffalo and making plays for the Bills. I see a lot of the same qualities in Sheldrick Redwine. Micah Hyde's versatility is one of the reasons he's going to stick around in this league for quite some time. I think Sheldrick Redwine has a lot of those same qualities to his game as well. I think if the Browns say, you know what, we'd like you as our nickel, I think he could play nickel, and they wouldn't bat an eye, and neither would I. They said, hey, I need you to go out wide and play corner. I think he could do that as well. And if they said, hey, we love you as our free safety, go play free, I think he could do that too. Even though I think you have a free in Demarius Randall that's just fine. Never hurts to have more guys in there for depth. If anything were to happen to Demarius Randall, and we know he's a guy that doesn't mind getting injured, a guy like Sheldrick Redwine could step in and you wouldn't miss a beat. So we move on to the 5th round, 155th pick overall. Linebacker out of Alabama, Lindell Mack Wilson is the selection. So this one here was a head scratcher. I talked about this profusely on my podcast. I was shocked to see the fall of Mack Wilson, and I waited for an excuse, and I heard multiple excuses, none of which could be validated. So I've got my own theory. I listened to all of the reports as to why he dropped in the draft, none of which could be substantiated. And now I've got my own theory as to why he was still sitting here in the 5th round for the Cleveland Browns to select. So here's my breakdown of Mack Wilson. One of the biggest slides of any player in the 2019 NFL Draft happened to Alabama linebacker Mack Wilson. In what was a very lackluster linebacker class, Wilson was thought to be the best of the rest after the 2 Devons. At worst, a 3rd round pick, at best a 2nd, and the 3rd linebacker off the board. Instead of being the 3rd guy selected at the linebacker position in this draft, 13 other linebackers went before Mack Wilson in this draft, and the Browns stopped his plummet in the 5th round. So why did he fall? Supposedly, some say he had a degenerative knee injury that was going to progressively get worse, and so teams medically took him off the board. Others say he had an attitude problem, which he refuted. Don't know how true that is, and if that's why teams, we've seen guys with off the field issues or guys that have a little bit of a toot or whatever. that's not going to drop you from a potential third round or a second round pick to a fifth round pick generally. Some say he's just not that good. All right, cool. If that's how you feel, like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, hell, the Browns thought that Sione Takitaki apparently was better than him, and teams thought 13 other linebackers were better than this guy, including the team that selected him, who took another linebacker a full 2 rounds before him. So obviously there was something out there. Here's my theory. All right, I say he suffered from OBB, which is overdrafted Bama backers before him. All right. So what I'm talking about are all the long line of Alabama backers that really benefited from just talented football players around them. We know at any given time, Alabama has 7 or 8 NFL prospects on their defense, 3 or 4 of which are first round picks. Another 2 are second or third rounders. And so it's sometimes hard to decipher who actually is really good and who is actually just benefiting and eating off of the talents of some of the other uber talented football players. And so over the years, guys like Rolando McClain, who was a first round bust for the Raiders, Reggie Ragland, who I never liked, was a second round pick of the Bills, ended up getting traded to the Chiefs. Courtney Upshaw, who's no longer even in the league. He's more of an edge rusher, but he's still a linebacker, and he flamed out with the Baltimore Ravens. Nico Johnson was drafted by the Chiefs. That didn't go very well. Reuben Foster is a guy that everybody had high hopes for. He can't stay healthy and get his act together on the field. Ryan Anderson, who I haven't been a huge fan of, hated the fact that the Redskins spent the second round pick. Again, another guy that's more of an edge rusher, but still, he was an outside backer, didn't pan out well, and hasn't panned out well. Jury's still out on Ryan Anderson. I think I know who he is as a football player. And Rashaan Evans, who I thought last year was overdrafted by the Tennessee Titans. I actually liked him as an edge rusher, probably more so than a backer, but I thought it was the combination of his ability to rush the quarterback and actually play backer that got him selected in the first round. Still thought that he was more of a second round pick, but whatever. Yeah, there have been some hits. You know, Donta Hightower and CJ Mosley obviously are the outliers, but I just named 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys that were Bama backers that went in the draft that people had high expectations for that just simply haven't panned out to this point. Obviously, the jury's still out on Rashaan Evans. He's only been in the league 1 year, so I'm not going to throw dirt on his name, but I thought he was overdrafted last year, but whatever. Bottom line is, I think that teams said, you know what? He's not really all that good. He went to Bama. The defensive line kept him clean. He's okay. He's not all that great. He's not even better than Rashaan Evans, who came out last year. We're good. And I think teams were looking for a reason not to take Mack Wilson. And so if someone said, hey, yeah, this guy's got a little bit of an attitude, cool, let's just take him off the board. Or cool, let's just knock him down to the 6th round. He's a 6th round prospect. Like, teams were looking for reasons. Instead of reasons to select him, they were looking for reasons not to. And if they heard anything, all right, yeah, let's knock this dude down. Let's get him out of here. So I think that's what he suffered from. But when I look at Mack Wilson, I see a guy that can move a little bit. Look, 4'6", 540. He's not the fastest. He's not the slowest either. 33-inch vert, 10-1 broad. He's got some explosiveness. When he sees it and he goes and he shoots his gun, guys in the backfield in an instant. There's some good things to his game. There's some not so good things to his game. I don't think he's all that great in coverage, but then you watch him in the LSU game late in that ball game, go up and climb the ladder and pick off a pass in the end zone, and you're thinking, oh shit. Like, there's some things that he does that you really like, and then there's some things that he does and you say, that's meh. So I can see why he had a little bit of a slide. I didn't see it coming. I didn't see a 5th round slide coming. But if I'm the Browns, like, you could have taken Mack Wilson and been fine in this draft. Again, they didn't know he was going to slide to the 5th round. I think they took him, like, this is literally best player available. Like, what is he still doing here in the 5th round? All right, cool, let's just take him. Because you didn't need 2 linebackers in this draft. But it doesn't hurt to draft 2, especially if he's the highest rated player on your board at that time, which I'm assuming Mack Wilson was. And so, as you can see, safety's off the board, corner's off the board, linebacker was already off the board. You still need offensive line help. Could have maybe selected an offensive lineman earlier in the draft in the 3rd round and still got Mack Wilson in the 5th. Look, hindsight's 2020. You know what I mean? You didn't know this guy's going to be here in the 5th. Anyway, 5th round pick, 155th selection overall, linebacker out of Alabama, Mack Wilson for me is And then if you're looking for a comp for Mac Wilson, I see him as a really poor man's, a great value C.J. Mosley. Like, he does a lot of things that C.J. Mosley does, just on a much, much lesser scale. C.J. Mosley's a better athlete. C.J. Mosley has better instincts. But it's comparable. All right? Again, it's great value. So, yeah, it's kind of the same. It doesn't taste necessarily the exact same, and the quality isn't as great. But it's functional. It'll get the job done. And so that's pretty much what Mac Wilson is. And that's probably why he was sitting there in the 5th round for you to select. That being said, next 5th round pick, 170th overall, place kicker out of Oklahoma, Austin Seibert is the selection. All right, so I'm not going to kill the Browns here for this selection because they met the requirements. I only have one prerequisite when you select a punter or a kicker. Translation, anytime you select a specialist. I don't give a damn if it's a long snapper, punter, place kicker. Any specialist that you're selecting, as long as you do it 5th round or later, I don't have an issue. There is no kicker, and I mean no kicker, where I don't give a shit what position he plays. Punter, kicker, I don't care if he can kick it 100 yards. There's no specialist worth taking before the 5th round. None. All right. Unless you're getting a Seabass, who you, and even the Raiders overdrafted him in the 1st round. You don't take a kicker in the 1st round, but the man played in the league for damn near 20 years. All right. If you're going to take a kicker before the 5th round, he better play for your ass for 15 years. He better be the next Jason Hanson. All right. He better be the next Matt Bryant. And he better play for you all of those years, like Jason Hanson did for the Lions. All right? You're going to take a dude before the 5th round. He better be your kicker for the next decade and a half. But that's nor here nor there. They passed the one prerequisite, the one qualification that I have. Look, don't select a guy before the 5th round. They didn't. They took him in the 5th round. I don't have a problem with Austin Seibert, okay? That being said, I'd like you, if you're going to spend a 5th round pick, because that's at the very front of when you can select. Like, I'd much prefer it to be 6th, 7th. But if you feel antsy, okay, 5th round, he better be damn good. Austin Seibert was 4 of 9 for what I deem money distance. All right, for me, the money distance in the NFL is 40 to 49 yards. Like, that's where you're going to kick the vast majority of your field goals. If you kick 30 field goals in a season as a field goal kicker, 20 to 25 of those kicks probably going to come from 40 to 49 yards. So you better be able to pretty much pound the center of the uprights from 40 to 49. And he was 4 of 9 in his career. Like, that's less than 50%. That's not good. I don't have to explain that to you. That's less than 50%. That's not good enough from 40 to 49 yards. All right. Now, the NFL, we saw in the Super Bowl, I think it was a great example. And the Browns, I don't need to explain to Browns fans the importance of a kicker. You go back 2 years when they were winless, and they could have won 3 or 4 games in that season if they had a better field goal kicker. Hell, last year, the Browns might have been in the postseason if they had a legitimate field goal kicker. So, the importance here, and I get the context of the selection, so I'm not going to kill them. And again, they met my criteria of selecting him after the 5th round, but the guy was 1 of 3 from 50 yards out. And again, if you're going to select the kicker in the 5th round, he's got to have a big leg. And he made, the one kick he did make was from 56, so that tells you he does have a big leg, but he's inaccurate with it. It doesn't matter if your leg is huge if you can't kick it straight. So I've got my doubts about Austin Seibert, but look, I'm not going to pretend to know about kickers. I thought Zane Gonzalez was going to be a shoo-in decade kicker for you last year when you selected him out of, what was it, Arizona? I thought Zane Gonzalez was the answer to all of your kicking woes, and I was flat out wrong. The man barely made it through the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season before you had to cut his ass and move on. And so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know about kickers, all right? I think I can identify when a guy's actually good, but then last year I was flat out wrong about Zane Gonzalez. So I'm going to just say, look, you got a kicker in the 5th round. You did what you were supposed to do. You took him 5th round or later. I don't have a problem with it. In the 5th round, 170th pick overall, Oklahoma kicker. place kicker out of Oklahoma, Austin Seibert, for me is so we move on to the 6th round, 189th overall selection. Offensive lineman out of Southeast Missouri State, Drew Forbes is the selection. So now you decide to take on an offensive lineman and select a tackle. And let's take offensive line off of your needs list. Thought you could have addressed this sooner, but okay, fine. You go to Southeast Missouri State to do it in the 6th round. All right. And I don't want to dismiss Drew Forbes as if he can't get it done at the next level. But obviously, there were other guys that were available earlier in the draft when you decided it was okay to select Sione Takitaki in the 3rd round. All right. I'm not saying. I'm just saying. Bottom line is, this is a guy, 6'5", 303 pounds. I listened to Area Scout talk about Drew Forbes and what they liked about him and why he was a really good selection for them here in the 6th round. And they like his versatility. They don't know that he's versatile. They just feel like, hey, this guy, the guy only knows one position along the offensive line. He played left tackle his entire career at Southeast Missouri State. And for the purposes of this, we're just going to call it SEMO, because that's what they call it there. And so he was a left tackle. All 35 of his career starts were at left tackle. So they don't actually know that he can kick inside the guard. They're just assuming that because he's a pretty solid athlete, I really like his feet, that he should be able to kick inside. I watched him in 2 games. I watched him in a playoff game versus Stony Brook, and I also watched him in another game versus Austin Peay. So here's what I saw from Drew Forbes. Nimble-footed, small school bouncer. So let me stop there. Nimble-footed. When you watch this guy skip pull, and when you watch this guy get out to the 2nd level, pretty damn impressive. I was actually surprised. I shouldn't have been, because 6'5", 303, you should be a little nimble. You're not the biggest guy in the world, so you should be a little nimble. But just because you're only 303 pounds doesn't mean you're going to move well. But he actually moved really well, man. And he's a bouncer because you see him throwing guys out the club left and right. And again, my only prerequisite for small school players is that you dominate the competition. That's the only thing that I require. When I turn on the tape, I shouldn't have to ask myself or go look up what number is this guy. I should be able to watch 3 plays and quickly decipher who I should be watching. I only needed 1 play to figure out that this was the guy that I needed to be watching. I think the first play of the game, I watched him take this, and again, it's FCS football, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But this looked like every bit of 220-pound defensive end. Tried him, and he failed miserably. He took him, and he just threw him on the ground and then plopped his 300-pound frame on top of him. Little pancake, extra syrup on top action. And I said, okay, that's my guy. Number 76 over there, mauling this smallish defensive end. And it was much of the same for the remainder of that game and into the next one that I watched. And so really physical guy with a nasty disposition. Let me get to a quick breakdown of Drew Forbes. So left tackle Drew Forbes manhandled the competition at SEMO. The movement skills, physicality, and experience are all pluses moving forward. Being that he wasn't invited to any of the All-Star games, the question now becomes, can he do it against much better level of competition? And that's really all we need to know from this guy is, all right, so I saw you destroying 220-pound defensive ends. I saw you manhandling 162-pound cornerbacks out in space. I also saw you devouring 278-pound defensive tackles. Cool. All right, you're supposed to do that. All right, that's what I expect out of a guy looking to get drafted from Southeast Missouri State. Now, can you do that against a 315-pound defensive tackle? Can you do that against a 280-pound defensive lineman or defensive end or a 255-pound edge rusher or a 205-pound corner? Do these things still apply? These are all questions that I have. All right, saw this guy just being downright nasty and ornery, and I loved it. And so that doesn't change whether you're going up against 300-pounders or 270-pounders. If you're nasty and your mindset is one of, I want to destroy this guy through the whistle, that's not going to change. But what does change is your level of dominance. And sometimes dominance and aggression are tied together. And because you know you can destroy a guy, you therefore go the extra mile and out of your way to destroy a guy. But once you're getting your ass handed to you, you're less aggressive and more just trying to figure out how to do your job to the best of your capability. So I'm anxious to see what this actually means in terms of this selection. Is he a guy that makes this football team? Is he a developmental project for them? Is he a guy that's going to play tackle? Is he going to get kicked inside the guard? Only time will tell, but Drew Forbes out of Southeast Missouri State. SEMO is the 6th round selection, 189th pick overall. Quality selection. Here's what I think of the pick for the Cleveland Browns. And my comp for him is Alex Kappa. If you remember, just a year or two ago, there was a small school kid out of Humboldt State that was throwing guys out the club left and right, mauling people at the point of attack, was drafted in the 3rd round by the Tampa Bay Bucks. And he reminds me a lot of Alex Kappa in the sense that small school guy, destroying the competition, good athlete, can move his feet, and I think he could easily have a career at guard. I think the Browns feel good about their guard situation, and that's why I think they needed to address tackle, and they needed to do it earlier. I'm not going to keep harping on that. We go to the 7th round, and 221st pick overall, a defensive back out of Tulane, Donnie Lewis Jr. is the selection. Quick question. Why is your name the Green Wave, but your jersey is all blue? Just a thought. Anyway, I digress. 6 feet, $190 for Donnie Lewis Jr. This is a guy with extreme ball production in his career at Tulane. 37 PBUs throughout his career, 7 INTs, one of which going to the crib. So there's a lot to like here. I watched him versus Wake Forest go down and dig one out and pick it off. So this is a guy with really good ball skills. There are some question marks about this guy that we couldn't find out the answer to because of an injury that he sustained playing in an all-star game, which I'll get to here in a second. But Donnie Lewis Jr. for me, thin, fluid cornerback with good ball skills, but really can't decipher his long-distance speed, and it doesn't appear to be all that great to begin with. Now you couple that with a slight frame and an injury that he sustained in the East-West Shrine game in practice. He suffered a Jones fracture in his foot. Whatever the hell that is, doesn't sound good. And so we don't really know because he didn't get to run prior to the draft. And again, on tape, doesn't seem all that fast to me. So I'm questioning long distance speed. Again, I don't really know. I generally with corners like to put speed to film, so I know what I'm dealing with here and what I'm getting myself into. Obviously, the Browns don't know. They've talked to people. They've got a feel for how fast this guy is. Some area scouts have probably talked to coaches. These players, they run 40s in the summertime before the season starts and in spring practices. And so they probably have a general vicinity of where this guy is 40 time wise. But he looks like a 4-5-5 type of corner. That doesn't get me excited, especially when you're real thin at 190 pounds. But he does have some really good ball skills. And for being a 190-pound corner, it doesn't seem like he's afraid to tackle either. So there's that. But you're 190 pounds. I saw a guy run a slant. And at the top of his route of the slant, he pushes off of Donnie Lewis, and Lewis goes flying 1.5 yards, and he's wide ass open now. And that was just simple because he didn't have any girth. He doesn't have any weight to him. So I find that he's going to struggle unless he gets a little bit more physically built. And he may struggle with NFL speed if he doesn't have the speed to carry long distance routes. So it's a 7th round selection. You throw this dart at the board, you see if it sticks, and if it does, cool. If it doesn't, it's a 7th rounder. And so 7th round, 221st pick, cornerback out of Tulane, Alani Lewis Jr. for me is so. As you can see, the Browns took care of 4 of the 6 needs that I had on the board. Um, I thought that it was unnecessary for them to double down on linebacker, but again, they took probably what they deemed to be the best player available the second time around with Mack Wilson. They also doubled down on the cornerback position. I didn't know if that was necessary either, but you can never have enough corners. So um, doubling down on those 2 positions stopped you from selecting a defensive lineman. I thought that was a real need in this draft. And I also thought you could have taken a running back. What I really would have liked, if you want my honest opinion, I thought you could have went about it 2 ways. And really, I said this at the top of the draft, so I don't really want to harp on it too much longer. But what I thought you could have done was you could have packaged up some of these picks and condensed this draft from 7 to maybe 5 players. Got in, got out, got elite level type of players, elite level talent, elite set of skills that fit exactly what you were looking for and got out of this draft. You know what I mean? You could have packaged up some picks and moved up potentially. And I thought you could have drafted a guy like Justice Hill. I thought he would have been a great fit. You don't have a guy on your roster at the running back position quite like him. I love Duke Johnson just as much as the next man does. But again, I don't think he's going to be on this roster past this upcoming season. And so why not address that right now with a guy that comes in and upgrades the speed on your offense at the running back position? Just a thought, you know what I mean? But that's nor here nor there, you know what I mean? You decided to go in a different direction, and it is what it is. So this is the draft grade for the Browns in the 2019 NFL Draft Wrap-Up Series. So that's it for the draft wrap-up of the Cleveland Browns. Sione Takitaki in the 3rd round, a place kicker in the 5th round. Thought there could have been picks better spent, but it is what it is. A 2.57 draft grade, not the best for the Browns. As a matter of fact, probably going to be one of the lower grades this year in the draft wrap-up series when it's all said and done. I'm your man, Louie Tee, signing off. Remember, if it's not your man T, it's not the best NFL coverage. It could be. Make sure you subscribe to Louie Tee Network if you haven't already done so. And also check out the Louie Tee Network podcast, as I've mentioned before. Available on various platforms. Check out the Louie Tee Network podcast. And make sure you rate and review the podcast if you're already a listener. So, with that being said, I'm your man, Louie Tee, signing off. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.
Louie Tee Network.